We're going to be in Matthew 23 today, and we're going to talk about this idea of idolizing the past. Now, I'm a visual person, so I thought we would kind of start with some pictures. But before we do that, some of the things that have changed over time. One thing is I was in education for 8 years. Education has changed. We do not teach people the same way. For some of you think that's good. For some, it's bad. But technology has changed the way we teach. We live in a time now where we live in what's called a flat world. So kids don't compete against kids in America for jobs. They compete against kids all over the world. This is just the time we live in, so we've changed. The internet has changed drastically. Gone are the days of the little yellow man and the pinging and the fuzz and the hopes that you would get on after 10 tries. So now we have this thing called high speed. Kids sit there and they're like, yellow man with pinging and I don't understand, what is that? Your parents can explain it to you at lunch today. But things have changed. How we build our homes have changed. We're in the process of doing some work at our house now and just watching how they do things, the different tools they have. It's pretty cool how quick things happen. Just taking that in. We don't do things the same way. And so, I thought I would show you some pictures of old and new. So the first one is planes. So there is no planes. It's a missing flight. So there we go. Top left is an older plane. Bottom is what a newer plane looks like. Now, if I was to say, let's all get on the plane in the top left and let's fly to Africa, who's coming with me? Yeah, there's always a few that will. Most of you are like, that's Southwest. I'm going that way. So, yeah, we don't fly that way anymore. It doesn't feel safe. We don't feel like that's something we'd want to do. But we look at the bigger planes, we're like safer, more luxurious. There's a bathroom on board. So we would pick that. So we don't fly the same way. How about in regards to telephones? I refuse to get a cell phone. I'm keeping my rotary. No, we don't call that way anymore. Who would have thought 15 years ago in the palm of your hand would be your email, your weather? You could FaceTime someone, you could text someone. More importantly, this afternoon you get fantasy football updates. I mean, who thought we would have been there? And someone's like, no. A lot of people don't even have landlines anymore. It's cell phones. And so we would never think of, well, I want to do it that way again and not use new technology. So phones have changed. How about the next one? How about cars? Now, I know some of you like restoration of cars. You like older cars. Should have put a muscle car up there. Or as I told the 9 o'clock service, my dream has always been to get like a 1970s VW van and redo. That's what I'd like to have. But cars not the same. When you got in your car this morning, or at least when I got up this morning, I had to hit defrost. How'd you defrost that thing in the bottom? You just didn't. So cars have changed. New technology in cars. They can tell you where to go. It can beep when you back up and you're going to hit something. Or like we have a newer car. My son thinks the greatest thing in the world is the back windows go down the whole way. He's like, Dad, thanks. I'm like, I didn't think of you when I got this, But he thinks that's a big deal. So cars have newer things. Kids may not remember this. We remember when we were younger, you had to do this with the window. Yeah, some of you still do. That's right. Kids there are like, it's a play toy. And you're like, lock. We didn't have locks on our windows either. All right, how about this, the military? Which way are you going across the desert? Imagine today if they said, okay, we're going to war, guys, and here's muskets. Who's going to fight that war? They got AK-47s. I'm not taking a musket. No way. We just don't do things the same way we did. So why is it that culture and times change? Things change, the way we do things change. Yet sometimes as a church, we don't change. We stay in the past and we begin to idolize it and say, well, that's not the way we've always done it. And we want to keep doing it this way, and we're not willing to change. But yet everything else changes and we go with it. But for the church, it almost becomes so sacred that we're like, no, nothing can change. We've always done the Christmas cantata the third Sunday of December. That's when we're going to do it. We can't do it the second Sunday. Things will happen. Some people get that way. We get so paralyzed in fear about the past and what could happen that we get wrapped up in old practices we don't want to change. I can take this from personal experience. I grew up in a pretty good church. It taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about Christ, how to love Christ, follow Christ. However, when I was born, the church was just under 1,000 people, which in that time in 1978 was a big deal. And over time, people left, pastors left, things happened. It shrunk. And here's what I heard. I remember coming back after being gone for 6 years, serving in another church, going to college, and hearing people say, remember back in the day when we used to have this? Remember when we used to do this? Remember when we had so-and-so as our leader? And what I began to realize is people had never realized what was going in the present because they were so worried about the past and what had happened. And that used to bother me because it's like, that was like 30 years ago, let it go, you know? And yet people hold on to those things. And that happens in a lot of places. And so today maybe you're sitting there and you're like, you know, I grew up in a church that was like that. It always had to be done a certain way at a certain time by a certain person. And then that person passed and everyone's like, what do we do? Maybe for some of you, you grew up in a church or a part of a church that, you know, it still idolized the past, and that's why you left, was because they weren't willing to look into the future. A lot of churches today are dying because they don't want to look at how things are done today. Student ministry. I work with students all the time. Student ministry has changed drastically in 5 years. As a matter of fact, if I tried to do things today the way it was done 5 years ago, excuse me, students wouldn't come. So like when you communicate, we put the phone up there, right? And you're like, that's crazy. Email to a teenager is like a stone tablet. Some of you are like, I just got a computer and email. I'm so excited about it. They don't email each other. Facebook. They don't Facebook hardly. They use it, they have it, but Facebook's becoming ancient. You know who the number one users of Facebook are? People over 50. Hey, Mom, how you doing? It's just weird, okay? You know, it's weird when your parents start, well, I read on Facebook. That's just weird. I don't want to socialize with a parent on Facebook or a grandparent. So that's ancient. So things are changing for teens. So I could be a stick in the mud and say, no, I'm going to do it the way I've always done it. I'm just going to keep doing it that way. Or I can say, look, methods are changing. Interests are changing. How do I adapt and do those things? I used to make fun of Twitter. I'll tweet, but that's becoming ancient now. You can say a lot in 140 characters, but the point is, things change. Why is it that as a church, we'll adapt to phones, we'll adapt to cars, we'll adapt to new ways of travel, but yet we idolize the past and we say, we're going to keep doing it the same way. And see, that's what we're going to look at when it comes to the Pharisees today. One of the things you have to realize, change is imperative as a Christian. You're going to change. Now, I'm not a believer you should change just for the sake of changing. I think you should change because there's a purpose and a reason for changing. And some people I know just want to change to be different. They just want to look different. But the church has to be relevant. We have to be willing to reach people in new ways, doing new things. It's kind of like this. You remember the cartoons where the character would be running and they pour concrete and all of a sudden it would get stuck in the concrete and they couldn't move or whatever? That's sometimes how we are as Christians. We're paralyzed by our own past idolization of traditions and people or leaders that we don't move. We're stuck in cement and we can't move. We're unable to. And so there's a question I want us to answer today, and it's up here on the screen for you, because I believe this is key to what we want to talk about, and it's this. Do we become more committed to our traditions than to truth? Because determining if there's a pharisaical belief in you will determine how you answer that question. Now, most people, for sake of saving face, would say, of course I'm committed to truth. But yet, even the Pharisees would have said they were committed to truth, but the way they live showed that they really weren't. They were more committed to tradition. And so we're going to look at that today as we unpack the passage. And so, you know, it's one of those things that as we get in, you've heard me say this before, I hate certain things. Remember the good old days. I hate that. It makes me cringe. It's like fingernails on a chalkboard. Who made them good? And who determined they were good? We did. Maybe my old days were horrible. But we call them the good old days. Or we say, remember when we did this? Or, things are much worse than they were before. They're really not. Sin's always been around. If you don't believe me, read Genesis. People were jacked up from the beginning. All right? They were a mess. And so the reality is, people get stuck in the past. Now, I know what you're going to think. He's the young student pastor. He hates all tradition, all that stuff. I'm not that way at all. I think traditions are appropriate in a certain time, certain circumstances. As a matter of fact, I appreciate them as I get older. As a young kid one summer, I remember this vividly because it ruined my summer. I would stay with my grandmother, and so would my other cousin, as our parents worked during the day. Well, all summer long, my grandmother and my great aunt would tout us around in a car with a camera, going to cemeteries, homes, churches, and other buildings that had no significance. Taking pictures, taking notes, writing all these things down for a whole stinking summer. I'm like, I want to play wiffle ball. I want to play Nintendo. My God, I just want to sleep in. I'm a kid. And I never got what they were doing. And what they were doing was they were putting together a genealogy book of our family's history. Now, being younger, I didn't appreciate it. I could care less. Like, that's a nice tomb. It looks like every other tomb. Needs cleaned, you know? But the reality was now as I've gotten older, as I was a teenager, I picked that same book up and began to read it and understand the history of the area, our family, where we grew up, why we grew up, how people got here. I have a better understanding of it now. So I do give some credence to traditions and the way things happen, but you can't be paralyzed and stuck in the way things were always done. So as we get into Matthew 23 today, it's a great passage. Jesus' last public sermon. The only thing I can tell you before we read it, Jesus goes out with a bang. That's the best way to explain it. Like, here's how I'd look at it. If they would say to me, Brian, you have one message that you can share, and then you can never share again. Like, I've thought about it, like, what's the last thing I would share? Well, how would I share with people? Okay, I'd probably want to give, like, a good message of, the gospel and how you need to hear that and respond to that. Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus goes out in a flame of glory. And I mean, he brings it. And so maybe it's a passage you've read before, but we're going to break it down into sections and look at it and just see what he said and how he looks at the Pharisees and how they had become idolizing of the past and traditions and how they were missing out on the future and the present. And so as we get into this, we're going to look at it in two sections. Here's the first thing. Before we get into it, we're going to look at verses 1 through 12. The first thing he does is this, is he's going to warn against false teachers. Now, the question is, who were the Pharisees? And we've been talking about them for weeks. And one of the things you continually have heard us say is the Pharisees were someone that people wanted to be. It'd be like today with your kid, you look at him, you say, hey, son or daughter, I want you to be a lawyer because that's where you make money, or, a doctor or whatever. That was basically what a Pharisee was like in their day. It was a job that you wanted to get to. It was a position you wanted to obtain and have because it brought recognition. So the Pharisees in themselves, it wasn't a bad thing. It was how they responded to the position they were given. Now, in that day, there were about 6,000 Pharisees walking around. And that's going to give you a better idea as we break down just how they walked around. As a matter of fact, the Talmud gives 7 different categories of Pharisees that existed in that day. Now, these are hilarious. You're going to laugh at some of them. But this is how they acted because the thing you have to understand was the Pharisees wanted to take the law, the first 5 books, and live as close to them, if not better than what they said. So this is how they did it. The first group were called shoulder Pharisees. Shoulder Pharisees were like your common day politician, or not even anymore, where they used to wear the signs outside of election areas that said vote for so-and-so. These guys would wear signs on their shoulders listing all of their good deeds. And they would walk around so everyone could read the good deeds of what they had done. So they walked around just saying, look at me, look what I've done. Aha, I've done all these good things. Recognize me for what I've done. The second group was called the wait a little group. This group would kind of sit by and wait for something to happen or cause something to happen so they could do a good deed so people would recognize it. So they were always waiting for the opportunity to step up so they could do something good and be recognized by others. Now, the third group is probably my favorite. They were called the bleeding and bruising Pharisees. Bleeding and brooding. I can't even talk today. Bleeding and bruising Pharisees. What they would do is they didn't want to look at a woman and be tempted to sin. So when they walked, they would close their eyes or cover their eyes. So imagine a guy walking down the street like this. That's what they did. They got the name bleeding and bruising because they covered their eyes so much they fell down, smacked their faces on the ground, and ran into things. But they were determined not to look at a woman and sin. The next one is the humpback tumbling Pharisee. These are like Eeyore. If you remember Eeyore from It's Just Another Day Here in the Forest. These guys would droop their shoulders, hump their backs, and just walk like this and never pick their feet up. It was to them like, here's the way I can show like, whoa, like humility. And so they would do that. And so then the next group were the ever-seeking Pharisees. These guys were like medieval times. Remember in medieval times, you ever seen this? They would get the horn out and they would blare it and then they would read the proclamation. the ever-seeking Pharisees would basically toot their horn, pull out the parchment and say, I have done such and such thing, and list it and say, God reward me. So you had one carrying their good deeds, the other one would read it saying, God reward me for what I've done. The next group are the fearful Pharisees. This group, basically everything they did was to stay out of hell. They were so scared of hell that they just responded. Now, does that sound similar to people today? I just don't want to go to hell. I'll get my fire insurance. I'll be good. I'll protect myself. The last group, the God-fearing Pharisees. The famous God-fearing Pharisees are found in John's Gospel. In chapter 3 is Nicodemus, and later on at the death of Jesus, Joseph of Arimathea. They were God-fearing Pharisees. They were Pharisees, but they understood who God was, and they got it. And so there was a few of them that existed. So you have all these different categories of Pharisees, all right? So you got, I don't know how many thousands running around with their eyes closed. So many were slouching as they walk around. But this is what they did. Now, Jesus gets into his sermon here in chapter 23. And I want to look at the first 12 verses. And it's pretty interesting what he says, and we're going to kind of break it down then. Excuse me. So let's read it. Starting in verse 1. Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples, and he said, the scribes and the Pharisees, they've seated themselves in the chair of Moses. Therefore, all that they tell you, do and observe, do not do according to their deeds, for they say things and do not do them. They tie up heavy burdens and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are unwilling to move them with so much as a finger. But they do all their deeds to be noticed by men. For they broaden their phylacteries and lengthen the tassels of their garments. They love the place of honor at banquets and the chief seats in the synagogues. Now, let's look at this. Here's how Jesus starts this out. First of all, he says they sit in the seat of Moses. Now, if you know anything about the law, Moses was considered the supreme lawgiver, the one who was given the law. And so they looked at it as that was the greatest position. What they did was the chair of Moses is where the judge of the law would sit. So they placed themselves there. They weren't given it. They said, this is where we should sit because we are the most spiritual people. What's interesting is the word chair there is actually the word cathedra, is where we get our word cathedral. So imagine the majesty of this chair where they sat, the prestige of the chair where they would sit in order to espouse law to other people. And it says they put themselves there. That's key. But then he says something in verse 3. Excuse me. He starts off verse 3. And then it transitions, but this is what he says first. Therefore, all that they tell you, do and observe. Wait a minute. Jesus didn't like the Pharisees. He didn't like how they lived. Why would he tell them to do and observe everything the Pharisees said? The word do there means an immediate command, like now, immediately do it now. So it's kind of like when you tell your kids, go clean your room. And your kid's like, no, in a minute, Dad. Oh, no, now. Okay, same idea. Do it now. The word observe means you do it now and you continually do it. So what he's saying there is if these guys are telling you to do what God says to do, then you need to do it. You need to follow it. You need to listen. So let's picture this for a second. Pull back from the story, the sermon. Let's think of the Pharisees. How do you think they're feeling about this point? Jesus has recognized that we sit on the chair of Moses, and he has said, follow and do what we tell you to do. This guy finally gets it. He's finally listening. He understands our authority. You know, their chests are puffed out. They're feeling pretty good about themselves. And Jesus has them right where he wants them. Next part of verse 3, but do not do according to their deeds, for they say things and do not do them. I love it. It's like he's built them up and he's like, boom, no, do not follow them at all. Do not do what they say to do. And here's why. Because he says in verse 4, they tie up heavy burdens and they lay them on men's shoulders. Now that word burden there is the word load or cargo. In other words, it's like putting a weight on someone. Imagine if I gave everyone a backpack today and I start stuffing it with bricks. Now, some of you are more than capable. You will pick it up, put it on your shoulders, and you'll walk out the doors. And you will make it so far, but eventually at some point, you'll have to stop. It'll become too much to carry and you'll have to put it down. Some of you will not even be able to pick it up. It'll be too much for you. The idea here is the Pharisees put so much weight and burden on the people that they couldn't carry it. It was too much for one person because they just kept telling the people, you got to do more, you got to do more, you got to do more. They kept throwing it on them. throwing it on them, and they couldn't do it. And he says, so they put these burdens on your shoulders, and here's what they themselves are unwilling to move with them as much as a finger. So they're telling you to do all this, and they don't do anything. They're lazy when it comes to their spiritual walk. They think they got it, but as you're going to see later on, they don't have it at all. So he's like, they're telling you to do this, but they don't even pick up a finger. And why did they do it? Right here in verse 5. Why did they do everything they do? So they could be what? Noticed by men. Everything you do, Pharisees, is so people will notice you. Everything you say is so people will notice you. Everything you wear is so people will notice you. And he goes through 4 things, and he says, here's how they do it. And so let's look at that. Their goal is to be noticed. The first thing is he says this. They broaden their phylacteries. Now, I have a picture to show you what a phylactery is so that you kind of get an understanding, and some of you may know this. There. In that day, they would wear a box on their head that was made from a ceremonial clean animal. In that box were 4 parchments of paper. 2 parchments had 2 different readings from Exodus 13. One had a reading from Deuteronomy 6 and another one from Deuteronomy 11. And they would carry those around, read those, memorize those. And they would be on their heads, the frontals. Then they would put one on the left arm because to them, to put it here is the closest spot to your heart that you can put it. So people, the Jews, would have worn those. Still do today. Some of them will wear them. You can see them if you go over to Israel or even America. Some people may have them. Here's the thing. It wasn't that they wore them. What did they do? They made them bigger. So rather than put this little box on, the Pharisees said, well, we can't have the same box as everybody else. We're Pharisees. We make them bigger. So they made them bigger on their heads so to be noticed that they're Pharisees. And God said, look, they want to be noticed, so they make their boxes bigger. They make them greater in size. And they wore them so that people would notice who they were. The second thing he says is this. They lengthen the tassels of their garment. Now, in that day in the robe, they would have had tassels at the end. Today, they don't wear robes, they wear prayer shawls. If you ever see the shawls that they wear with the little tassels, that was to direct respect and reverence to God, to draw you to God. The Pharisees said, oh, no. We can't have tassels like everybody else. We have to have longer ones because we are more spiritual. Now, even Jesus would have had tassels on his robe as a Jew. He would have had that. But the Pharisees said, no, we have to have longer ones. So picture this for a second. I'm trying to picture this week as I was reading this. You got these guys with robes on, with long tassels, these big boxes, walking around like this. It's just humorous to me. I wish I could really see that, Or the guy slouching, but everything was to be noticed. It was like wearing a billboard on your face, like, look at me, look who I am. And he says this, and here's the thing. When it comes to the garments, they're told in Numbers 15 about the length of their tassels, but the Pharisees said, well, look, tradition says to do that, and we'll do it, but we got to go one step further because we're more spiritual. We have to be better than what it says. We have to do more. And so that's what they did. And then this is what he says. They don't lack humility. Notice what he says in verse 6. They love the place of honor at banquets. In other words, when they go to a banquet, they want to have the best seat. They have no humility. They want to sit in a place of honor because they feel as a Pharisee, that's what they should be expected to sit at. And then it says they wanted the chief seats in the synagogues. Now what that is, in those days, on the platform, there would be a worship platform, and then there would be a big chair that would sit on it, and that's kind of where the leader would sit. Some churches still do that today, but that's where they would sit. They wanted to be in that position. To be in that position meant you were in charge. The Pharisees wanted that seat. And then he goes on and he says this. And in verse 7, they wanted respectful greetings in the marketplaces. In other words, when they walked, they didn't want people to snub them. No, they wanted people to say, oh, it's the Pharisees. Go ahead. How are you doing today? And then it says they even went as far as to be called rabbi. Now, rabbi is like the equivalent of someone saying doctor today. Imagine this. I walk out of here today, and I post that I am now called Dr. Brian Kelly. And I open a practice tomorrow. How many of you are going to come see me? Okay. We have a trust issue in this church. No, like I told the other church, I wouldn't come see me either if I was a doctor. But how ludicrous would it be if I said I'm a doctor and I make a certificate and declare myself a doctor? That's what these guys did. We're rabbis. Call us rabbi. They declared a title for themselves because they wanted the prestige of it. And so that was the title that they were called by. Now, Jesus says this. He puffs them up and he slams them and says, nope, here's what they do. Here's why you shouldn't follow them. And then he says something powerful in 8 through 12 as he transitions here. Let's look at it together. And notice this in verse 8. But do not be called rabbi, for only one is your teacher. All are your brothers. Verse 9. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for only one is your father, the Father in heaven. And verse 10. Do not be called leaders, for only one is your leader, who is Christ. But the greatest among you shall be your servant, and whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. Look, you guys think you all got it? There's only one who has it. There's one teacher, there's one father, there's one leader. And it's not any of one of the 6,000 of you guys. It's God. And so as he gets into this, he kind of has broken down what he's done. Jesus has just literally tore apart the Pharisees and said, do not follow them. Have nothing to do with them. Now he's going to transition into why. And so the second part we want to look at is how he rebukes the false teachers, how he rebukes what they do and why they do it. And here's the thing, as we go through these rebukes, there's two words he commonly uses, woe and hypocrite. Now, sometimes when you read it, you feel like, whoa. Woe is kind of like, whoa. That's not what it was. The word woe actually means like a gluttonal, a stomach-driven cry, outcrying of anger, of whatever. So he's like, whoa. You know, imagine like you're feeling the utmost pain of what you've ever felt in something. That's what he's saying. It's coming from his stomach. It's like, what are you doing? And then hypocrite's an interesting word because we like to use that in Christian circles. It actually meant a hypocrite was someone who pretended, someone who acted. And so he's basically saying, look, they pretend. The word actually means in its root, it's to pretend to be something you're not. Hypocrite. It's kind of like today. Have you ever watched, like you watch movies, have you ever watched a movie and like the actor was so good they had you convinced like they really felt that role? And then what will they say? The Academy will say, excuse me, so-and-so gave a convincing performance. It was amazing. And you felt like, yeah, they really were that because they're so good at what they do. The Pharisees would have been knocking down Oscars. They were that good at how they acted. That's basically what Jesus is saying to them. You are so good at your acting, you have everybody fooled and convincing that what you're doing is right and what you're doing is true. And I'm here to tell you it's not. And so when we read this, imagine Jesus saying like, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, you're hypocrites. Basically, like, you're fake. So he's not only tore down everything about how they dress, how they look, how they act, he's now like, you're a bunch of fakes. And here's why. And so let's look at him. He starts off in verse 13. And he says, woe to you, because you shut off the kingdom of heaven from people. You do not enter into, for you do not enter yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. In other words, who gave you the authority and the right to say who gets into heaven? Why do you choose who gets in? You don't have that right. You don't have that authority. So shame on you, woe to you fake people for thinking you were the spiritual authority in people's lives, because you don't have that right. And he says, you determine it, you can't. They misled the people in the scriptures, they never gave them truth. They only told them, follow this law, do this, do more of that. Remember, he said, you put burdens on the people. You didn't get it. The next one is this, in verse 15. Woe to you, because you travel around on land and sea, and you make one a proselyte. And when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourself. The idea there is they would go around teaching people, and they would almost make students worse than they were. Twice as much a student of hell. They're even worse than you guys, how you teach them. You make them even more prideful in who they are. They don't dare go to a Gentile. The Gentiles and them were dogs. That's how they referred to them. They were dogs. They were subservients to them. But when you do this, you make them just as bad as you. Then when he goes on, he says this in verse 16 and through 22. Woe to you, blind guides. Now notice this is the one time he doesn't say Pharisees or scribe. He calls them blind guides. It's interesting. And he goes on and he says this, you swear by the temple, that is nothing, but whoever swears by the gold of the temple is obligated. You fools and blind men. What's more important, the gold of the temple or the temple that sanctified the gold? Whoever swears by the altar, that is nothing. Whoever swears by the offering on it, he is obligated. Basically, it's this. You ever heard the term the blind leading the blind? That's what he says here. We have all these people out here who need to know truth, who need to know the purpose of life, why I'm here. And they don't because you don't even get it. You're the spiritual authorities. You put yourself in the chair of Moses. You sit in the worship in the synagogues on the place of worship leadership, and you don't even know it. And he says, so you are leading people blindly. As a matter of fact, some of you literally, you're covering your eyes as people follow you. It's the blind leading the blind. And then he says this, he goes, not only that you're blind guides, he says what you swear by. You're more interested in swearing by the things of man than the things of God. It's not about the altar, it's about the offering and the reason it's on the altar. You're more concerned about the gold. It's not about the temple, it's about the one who dwells in the temple. You don't get it. You swear by the wrong things. You go by the wrong things. And then he goes on, he says this in 23 and 24. For you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. These are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. See, in that time, there was 3 tithes. The first tithe was given out of your regular income. The second tithe was an annual tithe you gave to help offset the worship ceremonies. And the third tithe was one you gave every 3 years to help give to the Levites, the widows, and the orphans. What he's saying is, look, you guys give. But you never once give of yourself. Remember earlier he said you never lift a finger. You've missed out on justice and mercy. You're so worried about everything that people see you give that you never gave of yourselves. You never took the time for justice and mercy. You never took the time to do the things that were more important because you're so interested in how much you gave. You wanted to put that on your shoulders, look how much I gave, but you never gave to any other person. That's what he tells them. Now, where we want to spend our time is the rest of the passage. Because he's going to do 3 pictures that pretty much is the nail in the coffin for this guy. Jesus knows he's nailing his coffin at this point, lack of a better way to say it. But he's going to say 3 things that just dig at the heart of who the Pharisees are. So let's look at them. In 25, verse 25, he says this, woe to you scribes, you Pharisees, you hypocrites. You clean the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside they are full of robbery and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee. First, clean the inside of the cup and of the dish, so the outside may become clean also. Now, in that time, the dish referring to there was something like a platter. It was elegant, where you would put delicacies on it and serve it to your guests. It's kind of like if we go to someone's house or if we go in a restaurant that has nice table settings. Like, you've ever been to one of those places and you're like, wow, that's really nice, and you take a picture and post it for everybody to see where you're eating or whatever. But that's the idea there. It's like this real nice platter. It's like the finest china, the finest of everything that they could have. And he says, it looks great, but afterwards it has to be clean. And the best way to say that is like this. I put my cup in the dishwasher. It runs the cycle. And I don't know about you, I have a cup. All right, I have seasonal cups. So right now it's football season, so everything's Redskins cups. So anyways, I don't care who you cheer for. I'm up here. So anyways, the point is, everyone wants to give their opinion all the time. So I pull my cup out, and I'm ready to drink from it. And so I go to the refrigerator, I grab my drink, and I go to pour it in a cup, and all of a sudden I stop and I look. And you know what I'm talking about? Like, it didn't wash, and you got that crustaceous stuff on the bottom of your cup, and you're like, I'm not drinking out of that. Now, I know there's some guys here like, it's going to stay there anyway, so why not, you know? But the reality is, that's what he's talking about here. To me, the cup looks clean on the outside, but then when I look on the inside of the cup, ew, what is that? It's like broccoli or something, you know? And so now you're all like, no one's going to eat broccoli today. So, but you look at it and you're like, that's sick, that's disgusting, I would not drink from that. He's telling them the same thing. On the outside, you look perfectly clean. You look good, but on the inside, it's dirt. It doesn't match. He says, until you take care of what's on the inside, the outside's going to be a mess. Because it says in the Bible, whatever a man thinks in his heart, that's what he lives out. You Pharisees are living out exactly what's in your heart. It's all fake. It's not true. And he says this, you do it with robbery. What's interesting is they think about everything they do that's good. He says robbery. The word there, robbery, literally means you pillage and plunder people. He basically says you loot from people. You take everything you can from people. And why? Because you have no self-indulgence. You have no self-control. It's never enough for you. You have to have more. So it's not enough that you have all the accolades. You have to take more from the people. You put more on them and take more from them. You're a mess. You guys don't get it. You have no idea what you're doing. You think you do, but you don't. And then he says this, 27. Woe to you scribes, you Pharisees, you hypocrites. You are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear beautiful, but inside they are full of dead men's bones and uncleanness. So you too outwardly appear righteous to men, but inwardly you're full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Now in those days, we're told that they would they'd have their tombs, and you could not touch a tomb. It was considered unclean because there was death in it. So for people traveling, they may not recognize a tomb. It would become dirty. So they would wash the tombs. And hence, the whitewash is how they got it. So what he's saying here is this. And picture this. You go to a cemetery around here, there's some memorials or places where they put bodies. It's beautiful. You look at it, and it's like, man, that is an amazing, memorial or whatnot. Would you ever open it? No. Would you go to someone's grave and dig it back up? No. Why? Because you know the beauty of the tomb and the headstone, but you know what the death and decay is that is underneath of it. And he's like, the Pharisees, that's what they are. They look like these beautiful tombs that people see, they marvel at, but inside they're just like what's on the inside. They're full of death and decay. They're dying because they don't get it. They don't understand it. They're back here so wrapped up in their traditions, their customs, their laws, they don't get what's going on right now. They're missing out on it. Matter of fact, they're staring it right in the face, right? And they don't get it. And so he looks at him and says, look, you're full of death and decay. You look just like one of the tombs. Then it goes on and says this, starting in 29, 29, yeah. Woe to you scribes, Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous. Now, in those days, as prophets would die, they would memorialize them or build something. It's kind of like this. If you go to a stadium, like famous athletes get monuments. So like every good father, I have brainwashed my son to cheer for all the teams I cheer for, or he can't live at our house. So it's funny because my father-in-law is a Maryland fan, and he'll say, Ian, fear the turtle. He goes, we don't fear turtles at our house. I'm like, bam, right on, son. So anyways, the other night I take him to Camden Yards, and as you go to Camden Yards, like center field bleachers, you walk behind them, and you come to a picnic area, and then you come to an area where all the statues are the famous Oriole players. And he looks over and he goes, Daddy, that's Cal Ripken. I'm like, yes. He gets it. It's the same idea back then. Just like they had those monuments, like we do today, they would do that for prophets, people who served. The problem is the Pharisees wanted the same recognition. They wanted to have those things built for them. And he goes on and he says this, however, if I had been living in the days of our fathers, in verse 30, we would not have been partners with them in the shedding of the blood of the prophets. But he says, you testify against yourselves that you are sons of those who murder the prophets. The reality is, you're murdering prophets. You're going to murder the greatest prophet. He knows what they're going to do. He knows what lies in wait. And then he uses this last illustration in verse 33. And he says this, you serpents, you brood of vipers, how will you escape the sentence of hell? Now, you may read that and you're like, yeah, that seems pretty bad. I just want to tell you how bad this was that Jesus said to the Pharisees. A serpent is the same word as snake. If you know anything about a snake, snakes kind of like coil up and hide, and they wait in things, and if you touch them, they're going to come for you. This past summer, we were hiking at High Rock with the youth group. Some of the people were like, let's take a picture. We're standing there, and all of a sudden, I'm like, oh no, move fast. And there coiled up was a copperhead. And so the teens, see, I took care of your kids. They left, and after they left, I stayed there with a stick and played with it. So Yeah, I'll tell you the story. I told the second service this. I was in Costa Rica one time. From here to that chair was a snake, and I took a picture of it like this because I just think they're cool. And so that I didn't know, I could figure out what it was on our field guide. So the next day I asked the guides, hey, what is this? And they said, that's a Fairday Lance. Where did you see that? I said, at the restaurant. And they're like, that's the most venomous snake in Costa Rica. I'm like, yes! I saw it and got a picture of it. They're like, how close were you? I'm like, I don't know, 6 feet. So I didn't do anything. So anyways, but here's what he says. A snake coils up. It's sneaky. It waits for you. Then he says this, you're a brood of vipers. Now, a viper means a poisonous snake. And their time where they lived, there were twigs that would lay in the desert that they would pick up and use for fire. The snake looked just like a twig. And it would lay perfectly still, just like a twig. And as the people would gather the twigs up, ever so often they would grab one, and it would be a poisonous snake that would latch on and kill them. And so what he's saying is, you're just like those vipers. You look like everyone else, except you're killing them. And here's what you have to realize. To be called a snake or a viper in their day was considered to be called evil. They were the epitome of evil. So Jesus starts off his sermon saying, look at them. They sit in the chair of Moses. Look at them. Do and follow what they say. Listen to them. Observe it. And then he tears them down and he finishes up and says, the Pharisees are the most evil people that are there. People who thought they were doing better. People who thought they're idolizing the law, that they're following the law, the traditions of the law, that they're doing a better job than everyone else. Jesus just basically said, they're the most evil people out there. Don't follow them at all. They're going to kill you. And not in a physical sense. Spiritually, they're going to kill you. Why? He said, woe to you in the first woe. They can't enter the kingdom of God because of you. You determine it. You are killing people spiritually because you don't get it yourselves. And so as he goes and says this, here's the bottom line. He asks them, do you really think you can outrun God's judgment? There's 3 things I want you to know about Pharisees before we finish that, and it's up on the screen for you. The first one is this. The Pharisees were about rules over relationship. Everything was about following the rules. It was not about the people. They put burdens on the people because they wanted them to follow more rules. They didn't care about them. They took from the people because they wanted more. They didn't care about the people. They didn't do justice and mercy because they didn't care about the people. It was all about following the rules, never a relationship. Next one is it was about law over love. Follow the law, follow the law, follow the law. They never loved people. That's why the Pharisees didn't get it. Why is Jesus eating with those people? Why is he eating with a tax collector? Why? It'd be like, why? I remember this was one time, this was a thing. Why is that pastor going into a restaurant that has a bar? Which they all do today, but why would he do that? Jesus went where the people were. And we're going to look at that in a second. Because he loved them. That's what he told us to do, love them. And the third thing was, it was guilt over grace. The burdens, the cargo, they could never do enough. People felt guilty. I can never do enough. I can't be a Pharisee. I'm not good enough. He says, no, it's not about that. It's grace. It's a free gift. You don't have to carry a burden. You don't have to be loaded down with responsibility. You have to accept the message of what I've given, what God has given to you. And so the reality was, could they escape judgment? No. And he pronounces judgment upon them at the end of the chapter. And he says this in 38. Behold, your house is being left to you desolate, destroyed, done. For I say to you, from now on, you will not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Jesus has laid the ultimate smackdown on the Pharisees. He has humiliated them publicly. He has declared who he is, and he doesn't care. He has told the people, here's what truth is. It's not about all these customs, all these traditions, and about doing things the way they've always done it. It's not about doing them better. It's about me. It's about my word. It's about following me. And so here's the thing that I find humorous, at least in my own life right now. On Wednesday nights, the senior high, we're piggybacking this study, and we're doing it because I want the senior hires to kind of go through it. But then on Sunday mornings, we're going through the book of Exodus, which deals with the Israelites leaving Egypt and some of their ill givings. But it's interesting, 2 of the groups of people, the Pharisees and Israelites, we look at and we think, man, they didn't get it. What idiots. I mean, seriously, they're right before God and they don't get it. we're really not much different than the Pharisees or even Israelites sometimes. As a matter of fact, we don't wear boxes on our heads anymore, or we don't wear tassels. We don't sit on the chief synagogues. We don't do those things, but we do in our own way. And here's what I mean. We might carry a big Bible, and it has highlights and notes written in it, and people are like, man, that person's spiritual. Like, look at that. Look what they do. We might read all the Christian books, all the Christian journals, all the Christian blogs. We may listen to all the Christian music. We may be at church every time the doors are open. And we may, as a matter of fact, volunteer and even teach. And yet, we do it all because we want to be noticed by men. Are there people like that in the church? Yes, there are. I've met with them before. I've rubbed shoulders with them before. It's all about what they get out of it, not what they give back. That's what the Pharisees did. And so sometimes we think we can do more and more, but we're stuck just like them. Sometimes we want to continue doing things the way they've always been done. Nope, we're not going to change. We're not going to do it that way. We want to be just like that. You'll hear people say, we want to be just like the church in Acts chapter 2. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't all together. We need to take note of the present situation we're in. So here's how this applies to you today. We're going to look at this real quick. The first one is this. We can never allow our way of doing ministry to oversee or change the way we see lives changed. We can't come our way of doing ministry to precede how lives are changed. Luke 19:10 and Mark 10:45 say that Jesus came to seek and save the lost. He came to serve those people. The Pharisees didn't get it. They never rubbed shoulders with those people. We're pharisaical sometimes in our approach today. Well, God, I'm not gonna reach out to that person. Look at them. They're weird. They look different. They got all this metal in their face, all these tattoos or whatever. I'm not gonna minister to them. They're out. They're gone. That's a pharisaical attitude. We determine who gets in or out. Who is it in your life? They're all around you. I get it all the time. People are like, I just wish God would give me an opportunity to share. Open your eyes and look around. There's opportunities all around you every day. Every day. So just take advantage of them. The other one is this. We perform for an audience of one. Colossians 3:23 says, whatever you do as heartily for the Lord and not for man. Just like he told the Pharisee, don't do it for recognition. Don't do it because you want people to notice you. Do it because you love Jesus Christ and you love people. He's all that matters. One of the things I was challenged with several months ago at a conference was this. Do you live a life that makes people question who you are? Because if you look like people look, if you act like people act, and if you do things that people do, chances are they'll never look at you any differently. And so I can't worry about what people think about me. I don't want to offend people. That's not my goal. But we can't worry about what people think. We're not performing for people. It's for God. Like he says, there's one teacher, there's one Father, there's one leader. It's Christ. That's what it's all about. And then lastly, when it comes to our own life, we represent Christ and not ourselves. 2 Corinthians 5:20, we're his ambassadors. An ambassador is someone who represents someone. As it says in Peter, we're aliens and strangers in this foreign land. We're not supposed to fit in. An ambassador is someone who comes and represents the policy or the agenda of the person that has sent them. Christ has put us here as those who profess to know Christ to represent him, to be imitators of him, to show people who he is. Not to put burdens on them, like, well, you have to do this first. No, it's not like that. It's a gift. We're all sitting here today, most of us, if we do know Christ, it's probably because someone invested in us. Other people deserve that same investment. Now, as far as how this applies as a whole church, we have to look at that. Look around you in this room. There's people everywhere. You know what the one thing we all have in common today, other than the fact that we're sitting here? We're a mess. We have messy lives. Let's face it. Some of you are dealing with some pretty serious stuff right now. We're sinners. We sin. We do things. We don't have it all together. We never do have it all together. No matter when we think we have it together, we don't have it together. We're work in progress because that's what humanity is. And we can't think that we can do this on our own. We can't sit there and think, well, if I just do more of this, if I just do more of that, if I get closer by doing this, I'll be better. You can't. It takes all of us together praying together, ministering together, loving each other, the way that Christ said to do. You know, it was interesting. At a church one time where I was serving, I went and came in the office, and someone had went to the hospital. And so I was like, well, I'll go visit them. And so I did. And I'm sitting there, I'm talking with them, carrying on, laughing or whatever. And I said, can I pray with you? And this person said, that's fine, but I would really want to have the senior pastor come and pray with me. Okay, I get it. And it hit me. Like, that's one of those idolization traditions that we have. Like, only the pastor, the senior pastor, is more sanctified. Like, can speak greater things than anyone else. Or we fall in this trap, and especially at times here today, right? It's only good if the pastor comes into it. So you can't pass away until the pastor gets here and prays with you. You can't get sick or go into surgery until the pastor comes and prays with you. Why is it we can't call on each other? My prayers aren't better than your prayers. You know, just because I know theology, Greek or Hebrew, doesn't make me better. I care less about any of that stuff. I just want to love people. I just want people to know Jesus. I've had the opportunity to go to college and learn those things. That's great, but that doesn't make me better than anyone else. To say I'm better would be pharisaical. That's horrible. To think that because we have a position which God has put us in and it's great, that we're better than someone else, that's not true at all. We have to lean on one another. But that's one of the things that I've noticed in culture today is some reason like a pastor has a better prayer. You know, when I go somewhere with people from church, I love listening to them teach, pray with their kids. You know, I don't want to be involved. I just want to listen. It's cool to hear. And, you know, but people inevitably look at us and like, do you have something you want to say? Do you want to add something? No, I don't. I really don't. I'm enjoying the fact that you're doing it. I'm being ministered to. I don't want to minister to you. I want to be ministered to. And that's not selfish. It's because I want to hear what God's doing in your life. And so we can't fall in this trap to think that pastors always have to be the one to do it. I'm not saying we went out of work. Trust me, we got plenty to go around. There's 100,000 people who don't go to church in the Washington County area. We got plenty to do. But we want to empower you guys to do it for one another. See, we don't want to set apart and be like they were. They put themselves up here. We don't want that. We're just like you guys. We have temptations. We deal with sin. We have struggles in life, just like everyone else. But yet there's people who think it has to be the pastor that does it. The other thing is this, and I want you to hear this, and I'll close with this. When we live in the past, we fail to see the present opportunities that could affect the future and eternity of others. See, if we sit there, just like the Pharisees, if we get to where we have things have to always be the where we got to keep doing them the same way, it's all about following this, following that, doing this. We miss out on what's right before us. And what's right before us is a dying world in need of Jesus Christ. A couple of months ago, we were in Boston on a missions trip. Our free night, we went to Fenway. That's what happens when your youth pastor's a baseball fan. You go to Fenway. Bucket list. So we're walking in. Here comes 25 people in orange shirts. So we stuck out a little bit because you wear Baltimore orange when you go to, I'm just kidding. So anyways, we're walking in, and a guy's standing there. He's got one of those signs, basically like turn or burn, you know, put out your fire, except Jesus, I don't know, whatever it said. But, and he's handing out pamphlets to people. And so he looks at me, I guess, and figures he's the leader of the group. I'm going to give him one. So he gives me a pamphlet. I'm like, I don't want that. He's like, do you know today if you were to die, if you were to go to heaven or hell, and if you were to be smacked by a bus, you know? Why is it we always make so morbid of a decision? Like, how many people jump in front of buses every day? I don't know, it's just weird, but that always strikes me as that's like the winning argument people give. But I said, no, sir. I said, I've accepted Jesus Christ as my personal Savior. He's the Lord of my life. I love him with everything I have, and I strive to be more like him every day. I said, so I don't need that. Well, here, give them out to other people. I'm like, I don't want to give them out to other people either. He's like, so you basically want to go and spend time with those yo-yos inside and cheer them on? I was like, well, don't you think those yo-yos need Christ? Well, here, take them, give them to them. I'm like, well, pretty sure I can't do that. It's trespassing to run on the field. But I said, sir, I just don't want that. I'm sorry. So we left. We went to dinner, went to the game. On the way out, he's still standing there, still throwing paper at people. And it broke my heart, honestly. And I'm not saying God can't use that. One of my professors in college came to Christ because of someone using a tract in a student union, and he took it out of the trash after someone threw it away. I know it can be used. But here's my thing. Rather than standing for 4 hours throwing paper at people, and most of it was down the street as you walked, what if he just would have looked at someone and said, hey, can I treat you to dinner? Can I get to know you? Can I sit down with you? Can I rub shoulders with you? And here's the thing. That's what Jesus did. I'm thinking if Jesus went where people went, that's probably what I should do. I probably should go hang out with people, get to know them on their level, where they're at. Not expect them to show up at church. Most people just aren't going to walk into a church on a Sunday morning. It just doesn't happen. And I thought, isn't it all about building relationships? People didn't get it because they didn't want to build relationships. He chastised them for it. You didn't build relationships with people. You're too concerned about your traditions and how you did things. And I get that some people say that's evangelism. I don't think that should be the pinnacle of your evangelism, putting a piece of paper in someone's face. I think you should have to build a relationship and earn the right to be heard in their life. And it just breaks my heart when people do these things. And for some people, that becomes what they see Christianity as. The other thing that bothers me is this, is when we get into a church and we idolize the past and you hear people say this. I remember when we used to be a lot smaller. Oh man, we've gotten so big. Okay, well here's what I want to say to that. We don't care about numbers at our church. We don't even keep attendance. That's not important to us. But here's something I realized. If you're winning people to the Lord, you have to grow. It's just natural. And we're more about growing people than numbers. But we want to see people come to the Lord. And if you're going to do that, your church is going to grow. That should be a sign of a healthy church. It'd be like Jesus saying, I'm taking the 12, and everyone else that wanted him, he's like, forget it. I got my 12. I don't need you. He started off with a few. It grew to 12, and at any time there were several hundred people following Jesus Christ. Here's the thing. It says in the Bible he wanted to go off and pray, but people touched him, and he stopped what he was doing, and he ministered to them right then and there. He put his desires aside so he could minister to the people. Jesus grew. The numbers were bigger than 12 that followed him. It says there's a couple hundred people at any given time. So we can't keep saying the way things used to be. I don't like the way things are. When we start couching our statements with I, we miss out on what he's trying to do right now. Because then it becomes about us, like the Pharisees, instead of about everyone else. So go ahead and stand as we close our time.